Thank you. I appreciate it. Sometimes I tend to talk. Am I too loud? Too close? No? Okay. Very happy to be here today. I am originally from the Midwest, originally from Michigan, spent some time in the state of Wisconsin also, and now currently live in the state of Florida. So I'd like to talk to all of you retailers about your customer base, about a little bit about what happened with COVID, a little bit about how we've lost some customers after COVID, and then of course how to bring them back. But before I do that, just some background on myself. I did fish professionally for about 15 years, and I am no longer competing at all. I also was a owner-operator in the construction industry for about 18 years, and after that was a COO in the construction industry as well. I have a background in change management consulting. So if you don't know what that means, I am the person that retailers like yourself or companies hire to come in, take a look at their books, and literally figure out how to become more profitable, how to directly influence the bottom line, to come up with a plan, to implement the plan, and to also go back and we'll call it babysit the plan. So I'm going to talk about all different things from the industries that I've learned from and what I can talk about to help you folks here today. All right, ICAST is an exciting time. Any new first-timers here to ICAST? Okay. So the first time I came to ICAST, I met sponsors and retailers and new products and companies like yourselves that wanted me to come in and do a seminar, and they were asking, how do I bring new customers in? How do I keep them in? What can we talk about? And one of the biggest topics for retailers like yourselves that were asking me, this is 10 years ago, is how do I bring more women into the store? How do I know what they want to buy? How do I train my sales staff? And so on and so forth. The problem is when we leave ICAST, especially after our first time or our 10th time, we all go back to our stores, back to our jobs, back to our daily lives, and we have all these great ideas. We try to implement everything at once, and we do not practice what we preach. So first and foremost, as excited as you are to invite, which is my first slide here, through postcards, through social media, mailers, signs up in your store, whatever it may be, I'm going to ask you to actually take a step back. And if you want to understand how to bring people in and have those tough discussions, there's a few things that you're going to need to do first. First and foremost, what does your foundation look like in your store? Is it solid? How long ago did you build your business? When you did build your business, what were your plans? What were your sales goals? And have you stuck to those plans? Have you veered off of those plans? How many of you in here can say that you absolutely stuck to the sales goals with and have the same sales teams as when you first started? Anybody? Okay, that's good, because all sales goals should be a moving target, and they should move with the changing times of, for example, we had COVID. Now everybody's coming back into the stores, so your sales goals should change. Your foundation. As a change management consultant, when I go into an organization, the first thing I do is start at the top. And do we have any owner-operators in here? Okay. How about management team or presidents, CEOs that are not owners? So we have one owner and one CEO here? No? Owner-operator? You do everything. Okay. So my first thing that I would advise you to do is take a step back and say, am I doing too much? And I know the answer. I was an owner operator. I understand it's really hard to find good people. So once you take a step back, look at the foundation. What were you built on? What are your goals? What do you want to do in the future? Where do you want to be on profitability? And then you need to go from there. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money, which means you have got to implement the right people or bring someone in to give you some fresh ideas. And this is probably the hardest thing for anyone to do, regardless of the industry that you are in. Now, talking about sales goals, you said you do, ma'am? Oh, you said you're doing everything, so you don't have HR, correct? How many of you have HR in here? Anybody? Okay, I'm pleasantly happy to see that. I think it's important in this industry, in the fishing industry, to be interactive with your sales teams, and sometimes, too loud. Sometimes that HR can actually be a blockade rather than an assistant or a help to you. So it's good that you don't have that. Action plan. If you do not have an action plan currently and you leave ICAST and you're very excited about all the ideas, sit down first and foremost. If you are an owner, I'm going to use you two as an example. Come up with an action plan, but my suggestion is 18 months minimum. Put it on the calendar, then bring in your sales staff next. Talk with your sales staff, go over the action plan with them. So invite yourselves, invite your president, your CEO, if you are an owner-operator, bring in your sales team, and then bring in your staff. And go over all the actionable items. That is probably number one. In your own region, regardless of where you live or where you're from, you should know your customer. And if you don't, here's my suggestion. Ask your sales staff. Ask your customers what they want. That would be another really good thing. Has anyone in here actually rung someone up in the store or sold an item to them and asked them, would you like to come back again? Or what can I do so that you come back into my shop? Have you ever asked anyone that? Every day. That's good to hear. All right. When you or your sales staff is sending out invitations, and I'm not talking about a physical invitation, I'm talking about a presence. If I'm selling products to these two folks over here, am I inviting them to come in, or am I giving a persona of only inviting certain people? And I'm not talking about anglers, and sometimes these discussions can be a little bit more challenging than other times. I'll give you a better example. When I first started doing seminars at sporting goods shows, I was speaking about electronics, both Lowrance and Garmin at the time. And what I was doing was I was standing up here and I was talking about all the high-end or the advanced features that the product was able to do. So my invitation wasn't necessarily a paper one. However, I had a full crowd of people, and I was only inviting those few people in the audience who knew or were on the same level that I was on. And that was extremely problematic, and I didn't even know that I was doing it. So within your own organization, you may have staff members that are more advanced anglers. They're better bass fishermen than they are walleye or crappie or salt or whatever it is. And they all have their personal passion for the sport, and they're all excited. But what invitation are they sending out? Are they only inviting people that fish for crappie because that's what they love? And are they talking to your customers less who want to fish for bass because they don't like the bass guys. And so I was a walleye pro. Would I only be specifically talking or inviting a walleye angler to speak to me and spending more time with them on the floor of the store, because that's my specialty and that's what I personally prefer. Sometimes it's hard. We can have a great manager, we can have a great person on the floor, but we as owners, operators, CEOs, and managers need to manage the personalities also, so that we make sure that they're actually inviting and welcoming all customers so that they come back a second time. This is probably one of the most important things that I can tell you. I used to work with some of the boat dealers and sit with their sales staff and talk one-on-one. And I will tell you that 10 years ago, if I walked into a boat dealership with my husband to purchase a boat, even though I was the professional angler, the salesperson would 95% of the time would acknowledge my husband and would not acknowledge me. And I was, of course, a sponsored angler, so I wasn't purchasing a boat from a dealership. However, these little nuances, even the best salespeople, sometimes, again, it's an invitation to your customers where you're actually pushing them away rather than bringing them in. The next slide talks about the difficult question. And the difficult question after COVID, before COVID, and even today is, are we welcoming customers of all shapes and sizes? How about if I say it that way? Of all shapes and sizes. I can give just a couple examples on myself walking into a store in a state that I did not live in, and it was a bait shop that was attached to a gas station. Pulled in, had a man with me, gassed up the truck. The questions about the boat were never directed to me ever. They were directed to the guy that was with me, who didn't own the boat, who didn't own the truck, but everybody wanted to know how fast that 400 Mercury Verado went, but didn't think to even ask me. Now, I have thick skin, and that's absolutely fine, but that very first interaction in your store is so much more important than you can imagine. Now, during COVID, men, women, everyone was looking for something else and more things to do. So they started fishing, kayaking, paddle boarding. I mean, profits were up, sales were up, things were fantastic. So that first experience didn't necessarily mean as much as it does today. However, I can tell you that I get messages on Facebook. They call me, they text me, they'll see me at a show, and they'll come to me and say, you know, I watched you at a seminar. I was at a sports show with my husband. I was really excited after I saw you, so I went to such and such bait shop by myself to purchase something, and everyone was so rude to me. I don't ever want to do this again. And it is absolutely heart-wrenching to hear those stories. So that first experience means a lot. And not everybody and not all of your customers are really willing to walk up and ask questions all the time. It can be scary. They don't want to sound dumb. They don't want to sound stupid. And it's intimidating, especially if you have a group of sales staff that's all huddled up in a group talking amongst each other. They certainly don't want to come in and break up that group and ask a question and sound stupid about their very first purchase that they've ever made. Last week, I was with a husband-wife team who he had retired from the software industry. She had retired from Cisco Foods. They live in Boulder, Colorado, and they bought and sold a fly fishing shop that they owned for 10 years. And I asked them, I said, well, why did you sell it? And they said, well, it got to be so big, it grew so fast, And it was so big, we just couldn't handle it anymore. We had already retired once, and we decided to sell it to a local, one of our guides. And we're really excited, and it's thriving right now. So my question to him and her was, okay, so tell me a little bit about what you did that it got so big that you sold it because it was unmanageable anymore. They did a rewards program, which, is anyone in here already doing a return reward program? Okay, so they would the consumer would come in, they spend first purchase fly fishing $2,000. These numbers I know are quite high. Let's say they spend $100 in your shop. Then the reward would be $10 to come back. It's kind of like Kohl's. Does anyone shop at Kohl's? Okay. Usually the ladies are the ones raising their hands. It's very similar to that. When you spend money, you get rewards. That brought them back in the shop. But they also had 36 guides on staff, and all of their salespeople had strict rules. No huddling. Make yourself open and available. You know how, have you ever learned not to talk to someone like this? Because you're automatically cutting yourself off. If your sales team does this, it's a automatic, you're blocking people from, not that you have to give everybody a hug, but their sales staff had to learn personality traits, how to open up, how to talk to people with eye contact, regardless of race, male, female, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they came from the corporate world. They did some extreme training with their staff. They hired guides and created programs that their consumers could purchase, receive rewards, come back in, and then they had classes. How to spool up your line for first-time users. Their store was also very welcoming. They had like a coffee bar and a water cooler that customers could utilize. And I don't know how many of you are old enough in this room to remember the old auto parts stores where you could sit down at the round stool. Does anybody besides me remember that? Nobody? Okay, I can't be older than everyone in here. Okay, thank you. Years and years ago, the bait shops also, there was always a section where you could go in, and there was always a group of older men sitting around having coffee, telling fishing stories. Do you remember those bait shops? Those were great places to hang out. I think that back then there was probably a little bit of getting away from my spouse to hang out and talk about fishing stories. But if they're gonna hang out at your shop, they're going to spend money in your store. They're also gonna tell other people about it. And if you're looking to introduce new products, classes, or instructional times, bring in seminar speakers or any of that, make sure that you're opening doors to the female anglers, because once they come in, they tell all their friends and they bring their friends back. There are a ton of women's organizations in every single state. Do we have anyone from the Midwest here? East Coast. Okay. So, are any of you on the East Coast familiar with some of these women's fishing clubs at all? Okay, I would suggest Googling them, looking on Facebook to see if they have a group for the most predominant species in your area. They are everywhere. Now down here, Debbie Hansen, I believe, is here at the show. You can Google her. There is a Florida women's group. Angie Scott is somewhere. I saw her earlier today. But these women's fishing clubs, if you can invite them into your store, maybe they have a professional like myself, or they know of a female pro that they'd like to hear that's a speaker, bring them in the shop. Once you get them in there, and you start working with the leader of these organizations, they will follow. They'll just start coming. And I don't know if anyone in here sells kayaks for kayak fishing. Anybody? Okay. That is a very amazing way, especially for the female consumer, to purchase tackle and a boat, the kayak, on a much affordable level than someone like myself that has a 25-foot whaler, a $200,000 boat. There's a big difference. So finding those outlets for those consumers that you're not tapping into. You all have your regulars. You all have the guys or gals or husband-wife teams that come in all the time. So how do you bring those groups in? High school fishing clubs, that's another thing. If you aren't seeking out, or if you're in a college town and you haven't Googled to find out if you have a college fishing team in that area, that is another thing that you should look into. I will give you the heads up. With all of this comes the angler who's, can I have a sponsorship? We've all heard that. And for someone like myself who was a professional angler, I had the data when I asked for a sponsorship that I could go back to a person or people like any of you in this room to say, here is your ROI. This is what I'm going to do to drive sales. When I left Wisconsin last year and moved to Florida, the boat dealership that I worked with, my boat got delivered there. Other than that, I didn't expect them to do anything except for take delivery. I unwrapped it myself. I hooked it to my truck, drove it home, and took the plastic off myself. But here's what I did for them. Brought Garmin in. When they had customers that wanted to put Garmin on the boat, you know what they did? Their guys in the back that were rigging the boats, they called me and I answered the phone. When they were sitting down with a consumer who was buying and ordering a brand new boat and they wanted to put Garmin on, they said, hold on, let's call Marianne, because they were just learning about Garmin at the time. They said, this is what this person wants, and I would go through on speakerphone with the dealership to make the sale happen. I would go to boat shows, and in Detroit, there was a dealership there that called me and said, we have a husband-wife team. They're looking to purchase a brand new boat, but the wife is not sold on it. She's worried about where she's going to use the ladies' room. They said, can you please come to the booth? Boom, I was at the booth and helped explain to her so that seal the deal. That is a true return on investment. That is a person that is there when you need them. They do seminars at your open houses for your store. They say, you know what, once a month, I'm going to be at your shop and I'm going to answer all these hard questions at no cost, because that's included in the sponsorship, and I'm going to help you sell products. And you can advertise it that you're going to have a pro there, but they're actually generating sales. So, as much as all the professional anglers that are in this building right now do not want me to say this, unless they can provide you with data on how they are going to increase your sales, it is not worth it. Period. That is just, it's too expensive, to be honest. So, create the opportunities for the people that may not have gone fishing or bought product or even thought it was something that they could do. Now, besides your retail stores, for those of you in here, what other things do you like to do? Do you have a favorite restaurant? Do any of you golf in here? Do you have hobbies, horses, anything? Because all we do is work, right? That's what I used to do too. But besides that, do you have grandkids or kids in sports? Anything that you interact with other people besides at your shop? Nothing? All right. How about you two? Kids? Okay, so these folks said they have children. If your children play sports, And of course, people know you own a shop. You go to church, they know you own a store. If they start talking to you about the store, ask the questions. Do you folks fish? Do you have family members that fish? There are consumers that are around you in the grocery store, at church, at the soccer game, that you don't even know are consumers. And the reason you don't know they're consumers is because we are so busy working all the time that we are not listening to those potential customers that are right under our nose. And it's easy to do. When I was in the construction business and owned my own business in Michigan, it was 24/7, and it was absolutely insane. So try to listen a little bit more about those consumers or people that you meet, whether it's at a restaurant, sitting at the bar, you go out to dinner, wherever it may be, for those people that say, you know what, we're just trying to find a new family activity. Hey, guess what? I have this going on at my shop. We're inviting anybody new that wants to learn how to fish. Last thing I'm going to say about the invitation is this. Please remember, we all love technology, but we also hate technology. Nobody wants to give you their data. They don't want you to know where they live. They don't want you to have their email address. Not everybody wants to scan a QR code. So there might be those consumers that are coming in your shop, and maybe they're only going to buy a couple bobbers or a couple sinkers or something small and simple. Maybe they're buying the Snoopy pole because they have a child or a grandchild and they just don't want to hear them complain that they want a Snoopy pole anymore. But when they're in your store, make sure you're providing the old-fashioned paper information to them, because it is non-invasive invitation. They do not have to give you their personal data in order to get your invitation, if that makes sense. In marketing, we have found that there are people that are reverting back to paper, again, ads, because digital ads have gotten so out of control in emails that people delete everything because it's too much. So again, it goes back to the invitation. Invite those people with paper invitations, have the information so they can grab and go, okay? We talked about events, education or classes. We talked about that. The other thing I'm going to say is ask your customers for the order. This lady here said that she asks them every day if they're going to come back, or do you ask them, what did you like about the store? Or are we missing any items? If someone is in Michigan and they're a Great Lakes salmon angler, and they go into a Cabela's, I can tell you right now that their selection is selected by one person for all of those stores. And it's not necessarily as good as a smaller mom and pop shop, guaranteed. So if you have those smaller mom and pop shops, those are really the ones that us anglers want to go to. And they're in there. If they seem frustrated and we're paying attention to our consumers, what is it that we're missing? I know you can't have every single thing. It's too expensive, and I get it. And inventory, and I understand. But ask for the order on your consumers. Would you attend a class here if we offered one? And if they say no. And then if you know they're a beginner, would you, let's use women, would you attend a class that's specifically for women, that we're going to have women that are beginning angling and they want to meet other women that want to start fishing? Would you attend the class? They're either going to answer you honestly, but you're going to obtain some data. You're going to create that trust like we all used to do years ago, instead of everything online. I mean, honestly, reverting back to the good old-fashioned communication is getting us a lot further, and it's putting more sales together, more profit on our bottom line, and your business will not just grow, it will thrive. And if you want to be the go-to person in your area and you want to bring in new people, you've got to open the doors for them. And it's not always online. It might be attending other events and inviting people to come to your event. Profitability isn't always the amount of products that you sell. It's giving your customers the experience of activities, rich ideas, usable and shareable content. That is big, and I don't mean shareable on Facebook. I mean shareable to their children, shareable to their friends, which creates additional sales and reflecting of the place, which would be your place of business, they received it all from. So try to keep this in mind when you leave ICAST and you go back to your stores and you're trying to come up with ideas of how to bring new consumers into the business. Don't just come up with a bunch of events. Go back to the foundation, really take a good look at your staff, and make sure that they are, in fact, inviting. I took over a company in 2018 as the COO, and I didn't ask enough questions, which I should have, even though I had an 8-hour interview the first day and a 10-hour interview the second day just to get the position. But what I didn't realize, and 5 years later, after I terminated the people that didn't belong there, recreated the sales staff, increased profitability by 37%, I still had a major wall, and it was the owner. The owner was not willing to change. And if you have a manager like that, if you're in the room right now and you're the owner and you're not willing to change, then then I certainly can't help that, and neither can you. But in my case, with this situation going into this industry that I did and taking over this company, because the owner had a mindset only that he would do business with certain people and he wouldn't do this and wouldn't open up, there was no way I could ever grow that business any more than I had. That 37%, that was the end. The employees were never going to get the extra training they needed because he didn't believe in it. He didn't believe in marketing at all. He felt that marketing dollars spent were a waste of money, so it was either zero or zero. There was no alternatives. I know, right? You're shaking your head. But 5 years of working against the grain, I was never going to be able to grow that business any more than I did. So when you go back, if you're the owner and you have a great manager, make sure you really take a look and you are 100% positive that they are inviting the consumers and they're open to ideas. When you schedule those events for 18 months, your staff, your management, they all need to be a part of it, and they need to take ownership, accountability in all of it. And then the most important thing in your action plan for 18 months is who is going to babysit the program. You can't just put it on the calendar and say, okay, this is what we're going to do for 18 months. My suggestion is every 2 weeks, you sit down and go, okay, how did we do the last 2 weeks? What are we looking for the next 2 weeks? Does it take time? Absolutely. It is time consuming. It is not easy. But as you get into a routine, and I'm telling you, your routine is going to take 12 months before it sticks. It will not happen in 3, and it will not happen in 6. But once it becomes a routine for staff, they will learn to interact. And you know what else they're going to do? They're going to be more honest. They're going to tell you more. You're going to have the new guy or gal that you hired 2 weeks ago, who you may not have had in the meeting before you came to ICAST, but guess who's going to have the best idea of the whole year? the brand new employee that you just hired 2 weeks ago that you would have thought. So be open. Maybe there's things that are going on and new fishing trends that you don't know about. And that is another thing that I learned many, many years ago. I got a call from the writers at In Fisherman, and they said, Marianne, what's going on? What's new in the walleye world? And I said, well, there's nothing new, we're running, everybody's still trolling and inline weights, and we're using spinners with a slow death hook up high with a split shot and 30 feet of water. It's all the same. And he goes, do you have any idea that everything you just said we've never even heard of? But because I was so busy in my own world with all the other pros and we're all doing it, the consumer that's just starting, or they might have a 20-year-old boat just because it wasn't brand new, they had no idea what was going on and how we were catching those fish. So after I kind of got a little, we'll call it a spanking from the writers, I went to the local retailers that I worked with, like yourselves, who my job was to bring them sales, and said, this is what happened to me. The guys at In Fish just said that nobody knows about all this stuff going on the Great Lakes. You're selling the products. How about if we advertise and I do a class about these 3 things? They thought it was a great idea. So when I was there, talked about the technique, taught the people in the room how to tie the, snell the harnesses, make their own stuff, what they needed to buy, and we sold through the product. So it's, but if you're going to have somebody come in and help, make sure and maybe you have a staff, like this gentleman I told you about from Boulder. He had a great staff, and he had 36 guides, and they worked in the store, and this is what they did. They educated, taught the people about the products that were for sale, how to use them properly, and so on and so forth.